Okay, so it's time to talk about how the system of patriarchy did and is still doing damage to men. Last time I've talked in my video how the system of patriarchy was and is still doing damage to women. Trauma. Woman is a lesser creation to men, and so she's treated accordingly. Yes? The myth of the fall, the Old Testament, in all three patriarchal religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, to this day, that hasn't been amended, hasn't been changed. Woman is responsible. She's at fault for our fall here to prison earth. And then the whole purpose of religion, having the churches, synagogues, and other temples is so that you pray on your knees your whole life, so that you can be returned back to paradise. And you have to do what you're told, otherwise you won't. But there is also trauma, the wound that men carry, is very little talked about. The situation of the patriarchy oppressing women is better known, but the oppression of men is far lesser known. So today I want to talk to you about this problem, which is an ongoing problem. The definition of patriarchy, Anne Baring, some of you might be familiar with Anne Baring. She is a Jungian psychoanalyst and a historian. She's taken up the work of bringing the divine feminine to the foreground, into community, so that we know more about it, or actually what happened. She's really good at bringing the history, the timeline of when it all started to when the feminine started to be erased from our culture. And her definition of patriarchy, or she said the words to the effect that patriarchy, the system, is run by men for men. I will change that definition, because once upon a time, yes, most of the big patriarchs, the kings, the chieftains, the lords, the emperors, were all men, and the society was completely run by men. But now that's changed. So we could say that the definition is the system of patriarchy is elites running the system for elites. Okay? By elites I mean men and women. So you have this clear distinction in society. Society is divided into classes. This has always been true. Whether there was just men running the country or the empire, or now it's run by the political class, which is both men and women. There's always been an elite class. So you had the kings, and you had the king and his court, the queen, the whole court, and then all the other people attached to it. The closer you were to it, the more privileged you were. So this is the elite class of people. And nowadays we can talk about the elite class of the political class. And in this class, women are just as powerful as men. And they only exist, the whole purpose is to prop up the class, so that there is still a division between the elites and the rest of us. And the whole system is run by the elites for the elites. And most clearly, you can see the women as part of the elite class system now, for instance, in European Union or in the US. These women live in their own bubble of privilege, power, wealth, and the only purpose for their existence is to stay in power and to hold on to that privilege, to power. So that's the definition. That's my definition of patriarchy, of a system run by elites for elites. So it's nowadays is both men and women. Women are just as powerful. But how did the patriarchy damage, or how is it still doing damage to men? For thousands of years, this is not just a few hundred years, for thousands of years, the way that the system evolved and the way that the patriarchal system grew is through war. And the war was not just, the war wasn't there to protect the country as such. The war is there to expand the kingdom, the empire, to loot the wealth of the next door neighbors. Yeah, and that's how the system grew. That's how the kingdom or the empire grew. The more wealth it possessed, the richer it got, the more powerful it got. So initially we had the tribes which were hunters, so they domesticated animals. So initially the wealth was in animals. In Europe, it would have been cattle, pigs. In the Middle East, where the other center of patriarchy evolved, would have been sheep, goats, camels, yeah? So the way that a leader wanted to expand his power, wanted to grow his power, become more powerful, was to raid the next door neighbors, steal their cattle. It began with cattle, and it later evolved into slaves and land. And slaves include especially women, but you also had children and men. It was the slaves that did all the work to build the empire, to build the towns, build the roads, build the infrastructure. It was all done by slaves. And this system didn't end as you would expect some few thousand years ago. It only ended very recently. We still have photos of kids working in the coal mines, for instance, in the US some 100 years ago, 80 years ago. So, you know, 12, 13, 14, younger, in Britain, in the British Empire, kids working in the mills, in factories, and in mines, 12, 16 hour days, 7 days a week. So this system works on the same way of gaining wealth and power as it did at the very beginning. And this way that they did it was through war, through stealing other people's property. And they didn't, for instance, when they waged war, and they still do to this day, they waged war with the people that they captured. That is to say, the ones that went to the front line, the men, they were not men from that tribe or the country, because the king needed to have support of his subjects to wage the war. He didn't want to send his own people. He would have sent the ones he captured. So this is called a proxy war, using a proxy to fight your war. Romans were famous for that. So you know, you have these men that were not only captured into the empire, they lost their own sovereignty, their own country. They were also forced to go and fight on the front lines. This is not something, and this happened over thousands of years. So we're estimating millions, if not hundreds of millions of men dead fighting. So some leader, some king, some emperor could gain to hold on to his power and gain more wealth. And if you didn't go and fight on the front line, they would find you and kill you. So the chances were better for you to go willingly to fight on the front line and survive than not to fight, because they would find you and they would destroy you, kill you. And this went on for century after century after century. Men had no choice. They had to go and fight. They had to die. They had to show no fear of death. That is one reason in this warrior culture, to this day, what is the way that the men are supposed to behave is not to show their feelings. They are not allowed to show softness or kindness, because that shows weakness. And if you are a warrior, that was the warrior class, you had to show ruthlessness to the enemy. You had to be able to win. You had to fight in such a way that you showed no kindness, no forgiveness to the enemy. That was the only way to fight. So to this day, in many of the very traditional cultures, men are not allowed to show softness. So that's one thing. And to this day, you can see this in many, many traditional cultures. Men are not allowed to show softness. The other thing is, not allowed to show fear, not allowed to show any intuitive ability, because that was seen as irrational. You had to be rational. You had to be unfeeling, cold monster, really. So men, to this day, you can see the trauma that is, men are slowly recovering from this. Thanks largely, I imagine, to the Eastern religions, where the East has brought this more compassionate way to live to the West. People like Osho, for instance, and the Buddhism and so on brought this compassionate way. But prior to all this, men were not allowed to show any compassion, any kindness. They were the ones that always had to kill animals for meat. Yeah? They were the ones that also had to go and work, still do in many traditional societies, work and supply all the money, all the resources to the family. Women stayed home and looked after the kids. It was men's job to go out and find work and bring enough money to support his family and his children. To this day, you have this ideology that men should work until they drop. You see? So this is how the patriarchy is damaging, is not only damaged, and men hold to this trauma, still within the system, within their bodies, because bodies remember from one generation to the next, it remembers. You have all these things within them. But you still have this ideology that if you want to be successful in the Western, for instance, society, you have to work 12, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. But the work is only done by the people at the bottom of the level of the ladder of the classes. The top class, the elites, don't work. They have never done manual work. They live off the wealth and the money that they managed to steal. Back in the day, it would have been through war and through raping the other cultures. Like you had the British Empire in Africa and in India. It's a good example. You had the American Empire is still ongoing. You had they still have huge influences in Africa, in Asia, in Europe. They take resources from there. The whole purpose, the whole America, the US is based on the stealing and the killing and the murdering of the native population. Millions upon millions dead. Australia's the same. So you have these, and men had to play along. You couldn't say no if you didn't go along with the system. The system would destroy you. Like they do now. If you don't go along with the narrative, the system will cancel you, destroy you. They will close your bank account. You will not be able to find a job. You're a persona non grata. You're not needed in the system if you don't go along. The elites to this day control the information space and finances. They control finances because they can control you. And if they can control you, you're gonna do what you're told. So that's an important thing and to understand. And men have had to put up with this not for centuries, but for millennia, for thousands of years. So if you were not part of the elite class, which very, very few were, you had to go and die in wars so that the elites can hold on to power and have more wealth. And there's a good reason why we still have minimum wage. and the minimum wage is not really rising. The class system is still here. Yeah? It's still destroying the society, it's still dividing the society into those that have and those that have not. And the gap is growing even bigger. So I've had a few things that I wanted to say, and I'm going to read you something that I wrote regarding this problem. And in this I include a quote from James Hollis. James Hollis is a Jungian psychoanalyst. He lives in the US, I believe in the Washington area, so he's still working. And I'll read you the quote of what he says, what happens to men. You know, he calls it the secrets men carry. Yeah. So I'll read you what I wrote regarding this problem, and I'll comment while I'm reading this. Yeah. So, not only women, but also men, and especially the sensitive male living from his feminine, the intuitive heart, have been deeply wounded by this patriarchal, overly rational and imbalanced warrior ideology of domination instead of relationship with all divine life. Yeah? Which not only denies to our beautiful world and all its intelligent nature, but also which not only denies our beautiful world and its all intelligent nature, but also to us our birthright of divinehood. Yes, of course it denies us our birthright of God, goddesshood, because you know that is only allowed for the elites. Remember, only emperor or a king was divine. Everybody was just his property. And that's another thing to remember. We are all till very recently, we were their property. Like the animals, the land, the wealth, the gold, or whatever it is that they stole, people were also property. You didn't have your rights. This is only just recently changing. But even then, you're not free. You're still their property because they control right now the finances and the information space. So unless you break out of the finance, depending on finances on your society, from your culture, from your country, you have, for instance, some way of making cash, because if your money flows through the bank, they can close your bank account at any moment. You're still their property. Yeah. Okay. So this is what James Hollis said. This is entitled "The Secrets Men Carry." I have said to women, imagine three things. This is James Hollis speaking now. First of all, remove from your life permanently that supportive network of really close friends. There's another thing. Men were not allowed to have friends as such, or a close circle of friends, because that showed weakness. You were too feminine that way. You had to be a hard warrior. Yeah. That one girlfriend or several whom you talk to about your personal life, your body, your relationships, your children, your worries, your fears, remove that from your life forever. You're not able to share that with anyone. I know men to this day that don't share anything at all. They bottle everything up. And if he does not, for instance, go along with the idea of his particular culture, I see these very traditional cultures, like for instance in Poland, the Polish culture. And if he, for instance, does not earn more money than she does, or if he's staying at home and she's working, he will be destroyed by his own wife. Because the culture demands that he is the man, he is the one that brings all the money to the household. He takes care of them, not she. And it'll be his wife, his own wife, will be destroying him, because they are so, this kind of mindset is still very, very deep within this particular really traditional cultures. Yeah. Okay, so you're not allowed to have friends. You're not allowed to be, you're not allowed to be seen as weak or sharing anything. You have to bottle it all up. So that's a really deep problem. Now, secondly, sever the connection you have to what you might call your guiding feminine instincts, your intuition, or whatever you want to call it, your inner authority. You're not allowed to have any intuition because it's irrational. You're not allowed to share your dreams or visions or anything because you're going to be thought, oh, you're too weak, you're too feminine, you bought into this irrational bullshit stuff. Women only talk about that. Men never do. So you have to sever all connections to whatever insights that you might get from within. It's changing, of course, now slowly with the onset of the internet and books, like I said, with the coming of the more intuitive coaches like the from India and from Asia. But in our Western society, that was not allowed for men. If you did that, you would be destroyed and cancelled. Especially if you are hold a position in a university, or if you're an academic, you were not allowed to do anything of that sort at all, because that would show weakness, and you would go against the narrative, against the approved scholarly educational findings, against the text and so on, and you would be destroyed. You wouldn't be able to have a job. And thirdly, imagine your value as a human being is constantly up for grabs, and you have to continuously demonstrate it by meeting external standards of productivity, standards set by total strangers. Like I said, work. Just bear with me, my dog is getting crazy. Like I said, this is to do with, work till you drop. Products of standards of productivity which are set by someone else. Complete strangers tell you how many hours you have to work. And I know men to this day that if he thinks he's going home early, even though he runs his own business, he's afraid to show up home too early because, his family is going to go, well, why aren't you working? You're supposed to be working. It's too early for you to come home. These kind of standards still live deep within us. And men, they have no choice. I remember I had to fight for my own right to be able to do this work. Because otherwise, I was told that, people around me, I have to work. There's no time for any personal development or dreams and visions and intuitions. You're an idiot. What are you doing? You have to go and find that work. The better work, the more pay you get, obviously, the better, because the more money you're going to bring to the family. Standards that are set not by strangers, by the elites. Because you, or the whole purpose of you're the property. You are the one that is working for them. That was, only recently that people win a little bit of freedom, and you have your own house, you start your own family and so on. But even in Britain, in not so long ago, because everyone was their property, the king's property, you had to ask permission from the king before you had children. Fornication authorized under crowned king. That's the word fuck. You could say it that way. You had no rights. They owned you, and you had to work for their own, for their own wealth, for their own comfort. To this day, like I said, it's slowly changing. People are waking up, but it's to this day. So let's finish. What else does he say? These women would then know the inner state of the average man. He's talking to women. We can never have a healed relationship between men and men and women, and men and their children, until we begin to address these root causes in males' estrangement and isolation that is so profound and has been so true for so long. James Hollis. I know men, let me have a look, what do we got? I know men personally, especially in the really traditional Polish culture that have been destroyed because of this. They have been destroyed psychologically, physically. They become ill because they cannot live up to these standards that is set up by the system of patriarchy of what they have to do. And there's nothing worse for them than to feel that, for instance, they can't bring enough money, or they are too old, or they can't work and bring more money to the family. Or if his wife is earning more than him, or that she's working and he can't work because he's ill. I've worked in high care, not in high care, but in aged care. I worked in high care as well, but in aged care. And the men in a dementia ward, I think I mentioned that in my book, Where We Dream the Single Dream. And every time a male arrived, older gentleman with dementia, I had to go and spend time with them, long periods of time with them, to convince them to come out and eat. They didn't want to live anymore. And one way for them to go out is to starve themselves to death, because there is so much shame put on the male, on the man, because he's not functioning as a man anymore. His wife is looking after him. That is very shameful to men. This kind of stuff, this kind of psychology, this kind of, it's not psychology, it's trauma that is put on men to this day. Yeah. So I had to go and talk to them. Many times it didn't work. He would simply refuse to eat, and he would starve himself to death because there's shame in him seeing, he's too ashamed to go out of the room to the dining room and sit with others because he's got dementia. He can't remember, he can't look after his family. He's an older man. He's an older man too. Yeah. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. The wounds men carry. I can tell you from my own personal experience, I went through it. I had to fight for me to break out of this system, to make the time for me to work, to do all this spiritual work. Because if you live in a traditional society like I did in Polish society, there's no understanding why you want to be doing anything else than what the society expects you to do. Yeah. So men carry very, very deep trauma, very, very deep wounds to this day. For centuries, for thousands of years, they had to go and fight wars and die. They couldn't show fear, they had to go and die. Millions, we're talking about millions upon millions of men dead. Yeah. Because some elite, someone from the elite class wanted more, hold on to power more, and they were fighting amongst each other. It's the same to this day. They still hold on to our finances, they still hold on to our information space. Thank God for the internet, where things are slowly coming out, but we didn't have access to all this, and they're still fighting to this day for us not to have access. They're banning this and banning that, cancelling everyone, whoever speaks things that they don't want you to hear. Okay, so that's what I wanted to talk to you about, the wounds that men carry. It's like I said, women have been wounded deeply, deeply by this system. She's lesser creation to men, especially from the religious point of view, but men have suffered equally. Yeah, it's time for us to understand this and start changing things, build a better place for all of us, relationship-wise. Yeah. Okay, so that's all I wanted to talk to you about today, and I'll see you on the next one.